The Allies also directly bombed concentration camp prisoners, and today we are told this is proof of a German-planned Holocaust. This is another segment from the American propaganda film Nazi Concentration Camps, which was shown at the Nuremberg trials.
The slave labor camp at Nordhausen, liberated by the 3rd Armored Division, 1st Army. At least 3,000 political prisoners died here at the brutal hands of SS troops and pardoned German criminals who were the camp guards. Nordhausen had been a depository for slaves found unfit for work in the underground V-bomb plants and in other German camps and factories.
A deceptively captioned image of Nordhausen appears in Steven Spielberg's The Last Days companion book. We see American soldiers walking past corpses strewn on the ground. The caption reads, "The horrific scene of mass annihilation within the Nordhausen concentration camp." Let's look closer at the photograph. We can see the buildings have been bombed. Testimony of former prisoners shows they were lucky to survive Allied bombing attacks. This Jewish former prisoner and doctor describes prisoners laying in the camp hospital, sick of tuberculosis, in the final days of the war.
And there I had over 4,000 prisoners laying on tuberculosis. Sick. What you doing with tuberculosis? No medications, nothing. Hardly food. It was very meager already. The Germans didn't have to eat.
This former prisoner and doctor described conditions in the camp in the final days of the war. Sick prisoners didn't have enough supplies. However, he points out the Germans themselves also didn't have enough, even to eat. Clearly, the Germans could have killed the sick prisoners at any time, yet instead treated them in hospitals.
And all of a sudden, it was April 3rd at 3 o'clock, alarm, and American Air Force over us, and dropped the bombs just on our camp. And the whole camp was entirely destroyed. And out of this 4,000 people, we were 200 survived. Because they died there, they were in the camps, you know, hanging in the ceiling, dead bodies, and it was awful. It was burning days and days. We were still, if the nurses, the doctors, administration people who work in administration, we ran away. And the Americans made a mistake because they didn't know this is a concentration camp. They knew it is a military camp. They emptied the military a month before, and in January we put us in, you see. So they didn't know. So they came back at 9 o'clock in the morning and hit the whole city. The whole city they flattened. We ran away in the wood, in the fields, and when they emptied the planes, they came and strafed us with machine guns at, you know, because they could know who it is. They are Germans, you know. And we went into the wood, and we remained about a week in the woods. And we ate only the raw potatoes.
The British Royal Air Force bombed the camp full of sick prisoners. They turned around and shot survivors running for their lives. They flattened the nearby town full of innocent German civilians. The British are primarily responsible for this scene of, quote, mass annihilation, but images of Nordhausen, recently bombed and strafed by British planes, are still used today as proof of a deliberate German-planned Holocaust. And it's important to note that most of those seen in this photograph aren't even Jews, but primarily non-Jewish political prisoners, including Poles, Russians, and Jehovah's Witnesses. These majority non-Jewish victims of Allied bombing at a former labor camp are used to sell a supposed Jewish Holocaust. The Oprah program deceptively used 2 shots of the aftermath of the British air raid on Nordhausen.
More than 6 million of those human beings were Jewish.
This victim of the Allies blowing up and strafing sick prisoners at Nordhausen, being carried over rubble, was in fact likely not Jewish. So we're looking at someone who was both not killed by the Germans, but by the British, and who was likely not a Jew. Here's another clip of Nordhausen. The prisoners of the camp for seriously ill prisoners who were blown up or shot by the British were buried in this mass grave. The soldiers standing at the edge are Americans, but we are led to assume they are Germans, standing at attention after a job well done.
Wiped millions of people off the face of the earth.
Actually, the British brutally wiped these prisoners off the face of the earth. The Germans put them in a camp with doctors and nurses. What's incredible is that you were shown these images as proof of an organized, planned, systematic extermination program going according to plan.
The Holocaust. A systematic mass murder meticulously planned and executed.
When in reality, this was the result of total disorganization and utter chaos of a collapsing Germany, which was still being bombed relentlessly into submission. Rather than do the right thing and accept blame for what could be said is accidental collateral damage based on faulty intelligence, the Allies instead just blamed the Germans. Images of a camp full of sick prisoners bombed and strafed by British planes at Nordhausen are used as proof of a systematic, planned German extermination program. However, every single, mostly non-Jewish prisoner in this imagery was killed due to a British bomb or bullet. The editing of the film Nazi concentration camps was supervised by Bud Schulberg, born Seymour Schulberg, son of the head of Paramount Studios. Schulberg was Jewish and a member of the Communist Party USA until 1939. All of these dead were murdered with British bombs or bullets, yet no mention is made of that. Schulberg claims they died at the brutal hands of Germans.
At least 3,000 political prisoners died here at the brutal hands of SS troops and pardoned German criminals who were the camp guards.
This is a total lie and inversion of history. The final shot of the Nazi concentration camps film shows footage of a prisoner who had his head blown off. A prisoner account describes exactly how this happened and who was responsible. The April 3rd bombing. The accounts refer first of all to the Tuesday, April 3rd bombing. Right from the first blast, I took shelter under the concrete staircase of the Revier. A bomb hit the block and the staircase was demolished. I ran to the middle of the camp to a shelter dug into the ground where there were already a dozen civilians, women, children, and also an SS man, as green from fear as his uniform, who could only stammer, "Schrecklich, schrecklich, horrible, horrible." And indeed, it was not a pretty sight. Corpses every 5 or 6 yards, headless, or their innards ripped open. Today, images of Nordhausen are widely used as proof of a Jewish Holocaust. Why is this particular image so popular? The bodies of those blown up or shot by the British, then pulled out of craters or the rubble of buildings and lined up in ordered rows by the Americans, are meant to imply an orderly German method of mass murder. Apparently, they want us to believe the Germans lined all these prisoners up here in neat rows and shot them where they stood. If these dead people were German soldiers, the Brits would pat themselves on the back for a job well done. Instead, the Allies just blamed their bombing and shooting screw-up on the Germans. What a horrific scam pulled right in front of our very eyes. Imagery of tragic deaths, which were the direct cause of the Allies, are cynically exploited to sell a lie.
Adolf Hitler was pure evil, and he was in command of the most advanced technology and the best disciplined people and the best educated people in the world.
In the wrong hands, technology helped turn Europe into a slaughterhouse. This was a war that was also a crime.
Eisenhower, when he first encountered concentration camps, was shocked and surprised. He hadn't been told about them. His immediate reaction was, this is so horrible that there will inevitably become a revisionist movement someday to say this never happened. This is propaganda. This is a figment of wartime imagination. So he insisted that every GI who could be marched through those camps, and he said, bring your cameras with you.
This is a classic quote used to attempt to refute revisionists. Eisenhower said there would be deniers in the future, so he ordered witnesses marched through camps and filmed them. No one denies these are real bodies, but the false analysis of their cause of death, deflecting all blame onto Germans, is the propaganda. Every single shot in this news segment was taken at Nordhausen. All of the footage of murdered prisoners in the sick camp at Nordhausen shows prisoners blown up or shot by the British. This is another example of the propaganda formula, supposed expert, deceptive imagery, plus calling those who question it evil haters. It turns out this master historian was later accused of plagiarism throughout his entire career. He even lied about spending hundreds of hours with Eisenhower and meeting with him daily. Official records show he spent 5 hours on the record with Eisenhower. This is the mentality of these master historians promoted to the forefront of the monopoly media. There was no plan to turn these prisoners into this condition. This was the result of the catastrophic end to the war, not everything going perfectly according to an evil plan.